What if I told you that one of the greatest victories in history was won by an army that was desperately trying to escape? The Battle of Poitiers is not a story of a brilliant plan of conquest. It is a story of a cornered force, outnumbered, outgunned, and in a foreign land, forced to fight the full might of the French kingdom. Autumn 1356, the rainy fields of France. A young English commander, known as the Black Prince, sees the ring of encirclement closing in. Against him is King John II of France himself, leading a huge army thirsting for revenge for past defeats. What happened next was not just a battle, but a desperate gamble with stakes higher than life itself. Watch the video to the end to find out how a single tactical error changed the map of Europe, and at what cost the most valuable trophy of the Middle Ages was won. I'll let you in on a secret. The English army that invaded France in 1356 had no intention of engaging in a major general battle. The Black Prince's goal was quite different, not to win, but to demonstrate powerlessness. His campaign was a carefully planned demonstration of the vulnerability of the French state. This strategy, called a chevauchée, from the French chevauchée, raid, was not simply looting, but a deliberate act of psychological and economic warfare. It was based on cold logic: destroy the sense of security, and you destroy trust in the authorities. Prince Edward, nicknamed the Black Prince, understood that the power of the French monarchy depended not so much on its army as on the subjects' belief that the king was capable of protecting them. If a foreign army marched through the heart of France, burning villages and ravaging the land, that faith would collapse. By 1356, Edward was no longer just a young heir. He had become an experienced commander, hardened in the battles of Crécy and the endless skirmishes of Aquitaine. His name struck fear even before his banners appeared on the horizon. People said, "The Black Prince is coming and fire follows in his wake." Indeed, his army moved like a storm, quickly, decisively, leaving nothing behind but smoke and ashes. Leaving Bordeaux, which was loyal to the English, the prince moved north to the richest regions of France. His army numbered about 7,000 to 8,000 men, disciplined, mobile, and well-coordinated. This was not an army of siege, but an army of lightning. The English did not take cities. They bypassed them, destroying everything around them, depriving the enemy of food and income. Fields were burned, barns were looted, bridges were destroyed. The tactique de la guerrilla had a double effect. It hit both the wallet and the pride. For the French nobility, it was not just a defeat, but a disgrace. After all, every feudal lord swore to defend his lands. And now English troops were riding right through his possessions, meeting no resistance. The smoke from the fires rising above the valleys was visible for many miles and seemed to scream, "Your king is powerless." But the Black Prince's plan was not limited to plunder. He wanted to join forces with another English army under the command of the Duke of Lancaster, which was operating in the north, in Normandy. If the two forces had joined, the French would have faced disaster. They would have been caught between two fires. It was a bold, daring maneuver, calculated for speed and surprise. However, as often happens in war, fate intervened. The French king, John II the Good, having learned from past defeats, acted with unexpected determination. He assembled a huge army, according to various estimates, up to 50,000 men, including the best knights in France. For the first time in many years, the French monarch outmaneuvered his opponent. He realized that the prince was not seeking victory, but effect, and decided to force him into a battle he could not avoid. The Black Prince soon learned that Lancaster had been unable to break through to the south. Communication between the armies had been cut off. Now the English found themselves alone, deep in enemy territory, far from reinforcements. The prince realized that his operation had failed. All that remained was to save the men. He turned back, intending to return to Bordeaux. But it was too late. The French army was moving quickly, cutting off the retreat routes. When scouts brought news that King John himself was blocking the road ahead at Poitiers with his main forces, the Black Prince realized that retreat was no longer an option. He was trapped, far from supply bases, with tired men and almost no food. The French, on the other hand, were confident of their superiority. The king saw before him an exhausted smaller army. He believed that with a single blow he could end the shame of previous defeats take the prince prisoner, and possibly force England to make peace. His knights were already discussing who among them would receive the most glory and trophies. The Black Prince saw things differently. He understood that battle was inevitable and that the only chance of survival was to turn the enemy's numerical superiority into a weakness. He looked for a place where the French cavalry would be unable to maneuver, where English training and discipline would work to their advantage. Such a place was found southeast of Poitiers, between hills, vineyards, and hedgerows. Narrow paths, marshy lowlands, and thick bushes turned the area into a maze. The prince saw in it what others would consider a disadvantage, a natural fortress. He ordered the archers to take up positions on the flanks and fortify the passages with carts, creating a trap for the French cavalry. Now everything depended on endurance. The prince knew that his men were tired, but he also knew that the French, confident of an easy victory, would underestimate them. It was this arrogance, combined with English discipline, that would decide the outcome. The irony of fate was that the battle the Black Prince had tried to avoid became one of the greatest victories in English history. What began as a raid for intimidation turned into a legend of steadfastness and composure. What do you think of this chevauchée strategy? Was it a brilliant form of warfare that undermined the enemy from within, or a ruthless policy of terror that left behind ashes and suffering? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. What if I told you that everything you believed about medieval battles was wrong? We often imagine them as open clashes in a clear field, but the Battle of Poitiers was completely different. The position chosen by the English was not a field, but a veritable maze. It was a long, gentle slope crossed by an old road running through a ravine. The entire area was densely divided into sections by hedgerows, which at that time were as sturdy as modern fences. They grew on high earthen embankments and were almost impossible to break through. The only real passage was a narrow road that could only accommodate a small column. Sir John Chandos, one of the most talented tacticians in the prince's service, immediately recognized the advantages of this location. The English army was like a cork in a bottle. To attack, the French would have to either squeeze through the narrow defile or try to storm the almost impassable hedges. The main strength of the English was their archers. Equipped with long yew bows, they were capable of firing a deadly hail of arrows with great speed and accuracy. Chandos and the prince positioned their archers along the ridges, hiding them from view. Any attack on the narrow passage would be caught in crossfire from both sides. It was an ideal defensive position, turning the French numerical superiority from an advantage into a disadvantage. Thousands of French warriors simply could not enter the battle at the same time. The English knights and heavily armed warriors dismounted. They stood shoulder to shoulder, forming three main battles or divisions, covering the gaps in the hedges. They were to become the anvil against which the French attack would be broken. The Black Prince himself placed his standard on the strongest section, next to the elite reserve. He was ready to personally enter the battle at the most critical moment. His presence inspired the soldiers, many of whom believed they were seeing their last dawn. When the French King John saw the English position, he understood what was going on. He and his advisors remembered the lesson of the Battle of Crécy, where French knights had been stopped by English archers. So the king made what he thought was a brilliant decision. He ordered most of his army, thousands of knights and warriors, to dismount as well. They were to attack the English on foot, turning the battle into a giant infantry clash, where archers would have no clear target and the numerical superiority of the French would decide the outcome. This decision, however, had a fatal flaw. The heavily armed nobles accustomed to fighting from horseback were forced to traverse rough terrain on foot, carrying dozens of kilograms of equipment. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the last attempt at negotiations failed because of a single word, and what ultimatum the French king issued? Watch until the next chapter. Want to know the secret that changed the course of the war? All Saturday before the battle, the field was filled not with silence, but with tense bustle. But it was not military bustle, but diplomatic. An influential mediator, Cardinal de Talleyrand-Périgord, shuttled between the two camps. He was horrified by the impending clash and tried with all his might to prevent it. The cardinal understood the stakes perfectly well. On one side was the proud heir to the English throne, and on the other was the King of France. A clash between such figures would inevitably lead to enormous consequences. He begged both sides to exercise prudence, appealing to Christian values and common sense. The Black Prince, realizing his desperate situation, was surprisingly accommodating. He was willing to make huge concessions to save his army. The prince offered to return all the spoils captured during the raid and release all prisoners without ransom. Moreover, he offered to swear an oath not to wage war against the French crown for 7 years. This was an incredibly generous offer from a man known for his belligerence. In essence, he acknowledged the failure of his campaign and asked for only one thing: to be allowed to leave in peace. The cardinal, encouraged, hurried to King John's camp. He was confident that this outcome would suit everyone. France would be rid of the invaders, save face, and avoid the risks of battle. But he underestimated the mood in the French headquarters. King John II was surrounded by advisors who were eager for action. They saw a unique opportunity before them. The enemy was trapped. To miss such an opportunity seemed to them a sign of cowardice. They convinced the king that victory was already in their hands. After receiving the prince's generous offers, John became even more convinced that the English were frightened and broken. He decided to raise the stakes to the limit. He rejected all offers and issued his own ultimatum. The King of France demanded that the Black Prince and his 100 best knights surrender to him unconditionally. He demanded complete and unconditional surrender. For the French king, it was a matter of honor and a demonstration of absolute power. When the cardinal returned and conveyed this response, the Black Prince was furious. Surrendering without a fight was an unthinkable humiliation that he could not accept. He replied that his honor did not allow him to accept such terms, and that he preferred to settle the matter in battle. The negotiations were broken off. Cardinal Talleyrand Périgord left the field in despair, predicting that this day would bring untold misfortune. Both armies began to prepare for battle, which had become inevitable due to the pride of one king and the stubbornness of the other. This missed opportunity for peace cost France an entire kingdom. If you appreciate stories where personal choices determine the fate of nations, please like this video. Guess what happened next? Sunday morning, September 19, 1356, was cold and foggy. The two armies stood facing each other in oppressive silence. The French decided to launch a preemptive strike to solve their main problem: the English archers. Contrary to the general decision to dismount, an order was given to a small but elite group. 300 select, heavily armored horsemen under the command of two French marshals, Clermont and Audreghem, were to make a desperate dash. Their task was to break through a narrow passage and scatter the archers on the flanks. It was a bold, almost suicidal plan. All hope rested on speed and surprise. The marshals led their men into the attack, directing them straight into the bottleneck that the English had so successfully chosen for their defense. The English remained silent. The archers stood with their bows drawn, hidden behind hedges. They waited for the order. The Black Prince and Chandos watched as the armored column was drawn into the trap. And as soon as the French were within range, the order was given. Thousands of arrows flew into the air simultaneously and rained down on the attackers. It was not a haphazard volley, but a cold-blooded, disciplined barrage. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The narrow passage, which was supposed to be the corridor for the attack, turned into a zone of complete destruction. Shells fired from the flanks found vulnerable spots in the defense. The attack faltered before it even began. The disciplined column turned into an uncontrollable mass. The few who managed to break through the hail of shells were met by the spears of the English soldiers standing in the front row. Marshal Audreghem was taken prisoner, and Marshal Clermont fell on the field. The entire vanguard was neutralized in a matter of minutes. It was a disastrous start for the French army. The remnants of the elite unit, retreating in disorder, caused confusion among their own infantry, which was just beginning its advance. The French's first and most carefully thought-out plan failed with a resounding crash. But that was only the beginning. The failure of the cavalry attack did not stop King John. He saw his marshals fail and ordered the main force, thousands of dismounted knights, to launch a general assault. The first echelon was defeated, but that was only the beginning. In the next chapter, you will learn how the French changed their tactics and threw thousands of dismounted knights into battle. The failure of the first attack did not deter the French command, and the first of 3 huge infantry divisions entered the battle. It was led by the heir to the throne, the young Dauphin Charles, the future King Charles the Wise. It was a mass of thousands of heavily armed warriors who slowly but inexorably moved up the slope. They marched on foot, shielding themselves with their shields, and were a formidable sight. The English archers opened fire again, but this time the effect was different. The dense infantry formation, protected by armor and shields, was less vulnerable than the horsemen. The projectiles caused damage but could not stop this slow-moving tsunami. The French division finally reached the English positions. A fierce, close-quarters battle ensued. It was not a battle of maneuvers, but a brutal, exhausting, wall-to-wall confrontation. The French, taking advantage of their numerical superiority, desperately tried to break through the thin line of defense. The English, realizing that they had nowhere to retreat, stood their ground to the death. The battle took place in narrow passages between hedges, where numbers were not decisive. It was a contest of endurance and discipline. The Black Prince was at the very center of events. He dismounted with his men and fought in the front ranks, inspiring the soldiers by his personal example. His presence kept the warriors from faltering. The line of defense bent but did not break. The battle lasted several hours. It was a meat grinder in which both sides suffered heavy losses. The English archers, having shot part of their ammunition supply, put down their bows and engaged in hand-to-hand combat, using swords and daggers. Eventually, the Dauphin's division began to weaken. Having suffered huge losses on the approach and in the battle itself, and failing to break through the English lines, the French attack ran out of steam. The nobles, unaccustomed to such a long battle on foot, were completely exhausted. The Dauphin's commanders, seeing that there was no breakthrough and that losses were mounting, gave the order to retreat. The first great battle of the French began to slowly and chaotically roll back down the slope to regroup. For the English, this was their first respite, but they too were at their limit. They had suffered losses, and worst of all, they were running out of arrows at an alarming rate. They had repelled the first wave, but everyone knew that others would follow. The defenders' eyes turned to the field, where a second, even larger French division was already forming for the attack. The battle was far from over, and its most difficult phase was yet to come. What if everything you were taught about knightly honor is outdated? It was the turn of the second great French division, commanded by the king's uncle, the Duke of Orleans. It was a fresh, energetic corps that was supposed to build on the success, or, as it turned out, correct the failure of the Dauphin's attack. The Duke of Orleans and his commanders watched the battlefield. What they saw was not a heroic attack, but the remnants of the First Division retreating in disorder. They saw exhausted, panicked soldiers reporting that the English positions were impregnable. Instead of immediately rushing into battle to support the first wave, something inexplicable began to happen in the ranks of the Duke of Orleans' division. Perhaps the sight of the Dauphin's retreating division was misinterpreted. The commanders may have decided that the battle was already lost. Instead of moving forward to attack the enemy, the entire division of the Duke of Orleans stopped. Then, to the complete astonishment of both the English and the rest of the French army, it began to turn around and leave the battlefield. It was an incredible sight. Thousands of fresh, battle-ready soldiers simply walked away from the game without even entering it. Historians still argue about the reasons. Was it cowardice, a fatal miscommunication, or an order for a tactical retreat that was misunderstood? For the Black Prince, it was a real gift. He couldn't believe his eyes as he watched a huge part of the enemy army simply walk away. This gave his exhausted soldiers invaluable time to catch their breath, bandage their wounds, and redistribute their remaining ammunition. But for King John, it was a disaster. He didn't just lose a third of his army without a single blow. He lost the initiative. Now the entire burden of the battle fell on his shoulders and on his last royal division. The escape of the Orleans division became one of the most mysterious and decisive moments of the battle. It demonstrated the lack of unified command and coordination in the French army. Now there were only two forces left on the field: the exhausted but unbroken English army and France's last, most powerful reserve, led into battle by the king himself. John II the Good, seeing his subjects flee, was furious. He decided that his hour had come. He was not going to retreat. Thousands left the field, but the main threat was still ahead. In the next chapter, you will learn how the King of France himself entered the battle at the head of his last reserve. An ominous silence fell over the battlefield, which was soon broken by the roar of thousands of voices. France's last and most formidable force, the Royal Battalion, was going on the attack. It was the elite of the kingdom, thousands of knights and warriors, fresh and determined to wash away the shame of the first attacks. At the head of this armada was King John II himself. He dismounted like his men and walked in the front ranks, holding a battle axe in his hands. Next to him was his 14-year-old son Philip, the future Duke of Burgundy, who refused to leave his father. This was the largest of all the French divisions. It advanced on the English positions, which had already been weakened by many hours of fighting. The English had almost no ammunition left. Archers, their main weapon, were now almost useless. The Black Prince saw this steel wall advancing toward him. He understood that this was the decisive moment. If his line faltered now, it would all be over. He turned to his men, urging them to hold out in a last desperate effort. The French attack was fierce. They crashed into the battered English ranks with incredible force. This time, the French had an overwhelming numerical advantage at the point of impact. The fiercest phase of the battle began. The English line buckled. Under incredible pressure, the prince's soldiers began to slowly retreat. For the first time all day, a French victory seemed not just possible, but inevitable. Sir John Chandos, seeing that they were about to be crushed, turned to the prince. He said that all was lost unless something was done immediately. The English army was on the verge of total collapse. King John and his men were pushing the English further and further back. They fought with the courage of desperation, striving to reach the Black Prince himself, whose standard flew in the center of the battle. At this critical moment, when the battle seemed lost, the Black Prince made the most risky decision of the day. He could not win on the defensive. His line was about to be broken. He had only one last card to play. It was a maneuver he had ordered at the beginning of the battle, a move that would either save them all or destroy them completely. While all attention was focused on the desperate battle in the center, a hidden maneuver was unfolding far from the main events. Even before King John's attack began, the Black Prince gave an order to one of his most loyal vassals, the Gascon nobleman Jean de Grailly, Captal de Buch. The prince assigned a small but mobile detachment of several hundred soldiers. Their task was not to engage in battle, but to make a long, circular detour, using the folds of the terrain and the forest to remain undetected. The target of this detachment was the rear of the French army. It was an incredibly risky gambit. The prince weakened his already thin line of defense by sending elite warriors on a raid that might not succeed. For several hours, Captal de Buch's detachment made its way across the rough terrain. They were completely cut off from their army, unaware of how the battle was going. They moved guided only by the sounds of battle and John's royal standard. And then, just as the royal division was about to break the English resistance, Captal de Buch's detachment finally reached its position. They found themselves directly behind the French army, which was completely focused on the frontal attack. The French rear was virtually undefended. It was mainly occupied by servants, baggage trains, and reserves, who did not expect an attack from this direction. With a battle cry, the Gascons and English attacked. Panic instantly broke out in the rear of the French army. The servants and reserve soldiers, deciding that they had been outflanked and were surrounded, rushed to flee, creating chaos. The confusion in the rear was also noticed in the main battle formations. The soldiers in the king's division, who were confident of victory, suddenly heard the noise of battle and shouting behind them. They turned around and saw the enemy's banners where they should not have been. The psychological effect was deafening. Confidence in victory gave way to fear. The French attack, which had been so close to success, began to falter. The soldiers slowed their advance, not understanding what was happening. The Black Prince, who had been at the forefront the entire time, instantly sensed that something had changed. He could feel the tremor in the enemy camp. That momentary hesitation when a huge army, confident of victory a second ago, suddenly loses its balance. The prince turned and saw what he had been waiting for. Clouds of dust rising behind the French. It was Captal de Buch with his Gascons. His flanking maneuver had finally worked. A dull rumble came from behind the hill. Horses, shouts, the clang of metal. The blow struck precisely at the flank and rear of the French line. The prince instantly understood. The decisive moment had come. A rare opportunity was opening up before him. The kind of twist of fate that happens once in a lifetime. But to take advantage of it, he had to risk everything. Instead of strengthening his defenses and waiting it out, he did the opposite. He gave an order that would later be called the most reckless and at the same time the most brilliant decision of the entire campaign: to counterattack. "Forward! For the King and St. George!" he shouted, raising his sword. His voice drowned out the roar of battle. The standard bearers moved into position, and the pennants bearing the Plantagenet leopards fluttered once more above the field. The exhausted, weary English, who had been fighting off attacks for several hours, suddenly advanced. It was as if they had been infused with new life. The reserve, which the prince had been saving all day, just a few hundred fighters, moved into attack with astonishing speed. They struck at the very moment when the French lines were wavering but had not yet fled. Archers who had exhausted their arrows grabbed swords, hammers, even bowpins, and rushed into hand-to-hand combat. There was a terrible roar on the field. Screams, the clang of iron, the neighing of horses, cries of "St. George!" It was a psychological turning point. The French army, confident in its numbers and victory, suddenly found itself attacked on two sides. Its formation fell apart. The men accustomed to advancing could not believe that they were now being pressed by the very English peasants they had despised that morning. The retreat began imperceptibly. First a few knights turned their horses, then dozens more. Soon this retreating stream became an avalanche. The French battle formation, the pride of knighthood, was disintegrating before their very eyes. Banners fell, horse chains broke, squires abandoned their masters. Those who had marched into battle that morning to the sound of trumpets were now frantically searching for a way out of the field, jumping over the bodies of their comrades. Watching from a hill, the prince could not help but realize that the fate of the battle had been decided. "Press on!" he shouted, and the entire English line, from archers to spearmen, advanced in a single surge. The soldiers who half an hour earlier had barely held their ground were now driving the enemy back. The battle, which had been evenly balanced all day, collapsed in an instant. All that remained of the French army fled. Discarded banners lay scattered across the field, broken spears lay strewn about, and the bodies of horses and men lay mixed together. Where three majestic French divisions had stood in the morning, chaos now reigned. But amid this chaos, there remained one island of resistance, a tight ring of warriors surrounded on all sides. They did not flee. Their armor was covered in mud, their faces blackened, but their swords still gleamed. It was the Royal Guard. In the center of the circle stood a man in a golden helmet and a dark blue cloak speckled with lilies. The King of France, John II the Good, clutched a heavy battle axe in his hands. His face was grim and determined. He knew the battle was lost, but he had no intention of retreating. Next to him stood his young son Philip, barely able to hold his sword, but not leaving his father's side. They both knew that their army was already dying around them, but the king chose to die like a knight rather than flee. This last pocket of resistance became a symbol that even in defeat, French valor was not dead. Hand-to-hand combat raged around them. The English tried to break through to the king, some for glory, others for future ransom. The French stood shoulder to shoulder, repelling the blows until their strength was exhausted. Thus, in the heart of chaos, on the blood-soaked field of Poitiers, the fate of France was decided not by numbers, but by courage. And when the Black Prince, watching from afar, saw a golden helmet glistening in the evening sun, he knew that the end was near. The battle was won, but a new drama awaited ahead, the capture of the king. While the bulk of the French army was already in disorderly retreat, the battlefield was in utter chaos. The clang of metal, the cries of men, the neighing of horses and the moans of the wounded merged into a deafening cacophony. Amidst the clouds of dust and smoke, in the thick of the battle, a small group of knights continued to stand their ground. It was King John II of France himself and his closest circle. They were surrounded on all sides by a ring of English and Gascon horsemen. but they continued to fight as if time had stopped and defeat did not exist. King John, clad in shining armor, clutched his sword and stood with a dignity that commanded respect even from his enemies. His cloak was torn, the feathers on his helmet knocked off, his face covered in sweat and blood, but he did not retreat. Next to him stood his young son, Philip, who was barely 14 years old. According to legend, the boy did not leave his father's side for a moment, shouting through the din of battle, "Careful, father! Attack on the left!" This young voice, sounding amid the clamor of steel, became a symbol of that moment when the dynastic pride of France was not yet broken. The English quickly realized who exactly was standing before them. Every knight understood that this was not just an enemy, but the greatest prize of the entire war. The capture of the king promised incredible wealth. The ransom for the monarch could provide for an entire generation. A murmur swept across the field. The king of France is here. And dozens of fighters rushed to the center of the battle. Shouts of, "Don't kill him! Take him alive!" mingled with the roar of battle. A strange and wild struggle ensued, not against the king, but for him. Knights collided with each other, trying to be the first to capture John. Some grabbed his arms, others tore his banner, and still others shouted that they were the ones who had captured him. In this confusion, everyone considered themselves worthy of glory and gold. The king, exhausted and realizing that further resistance was pointless, finally raised his hand and held out his glove, a sign of surrender. This scene was later described as one of the most tragic and dignified moments of the knightly era. John surrendered not out of fear, but out of a sense of duty, to save those who were still standing beside him. He and his son were immediately taken into custody. When news of the king's capture reached the remnants of the French army, the last pockets of resistance died out. Soldiers threw down their weapons and fell to their knees. The battle was over. When the news reached the Black Prince, he immediately ordered the pursuit to cease. He was informed that the captive was indeed the King of France, and he sent his best knights, Sir James Audley and Denis Morbec, to ensure the safety of the high-ranking prisoner. The prince understood that from now on, he held in his hands not just a man, but the key to the future of Europe. In the evening of the same day, as the sun set over the blood-soaked field, the Black Prince held a solemn dinner. In a tent lit by torches, on rough carpets made of Flemish fabric, he seated King John next to him. And, according to knightly custom, he himself served him, pouring wine and serving dishes. The prince spoke softly and respectfully, comforting the captive monarch. "Sire, today you have lost the battle, but not your honor." John nodded, maintaining his dignity even in captivity. This evening went down in history as an example of true chivalry. The English admired the king's valor, while the French admired his son's courage. No one allowed themselves to be rude or mocking. A strange, solemn silence reigned, as if everyone understood that they had witnessed a historic turning point. The consequences of the Battle of Poitiers were catastrophic. France lost its king and, with him, its center of power. John was sent to England, where he spent the rest of his life in honorable captivity. He was treated with respect, given castles, servants, and even the opportunity to receive ambassadors. But the ransom demanded by the English was monstrous. It exceeded all the wealth that the ruined country could muster. While John was overseas, chaos reigned in France. The heir, the Dauphin Charles, tried to hold on to power, but the country was in turmoil. The army was defeated, the tax burden increased, and the peasants, driven to despair, rose up in a rebellion that went down in history as the Jacquerie. Estates burned, roads filled with refugees, and looting began in the cities. The state was literally falling apart before our eyes. For England, however, the victory was a triumph. The Battle of Poitiers strengthened its prestige and showed that even smaller forces, with competent leadership and iron discipline, could crush a powerful enemy. The Black Prince became a living legend, and France was brought to its knees. But as is often the case, victory brought not only glory, but also new suffering. The captured king became a hostage to foreign politics, and the country that lost him became a victim of its own powerlessness. The Battle of Poitiers ended not only with the defeat of the army, but also became a symbol of the end of the old chivalrous world, where honor and valor clashed with the harsh reality of war. The Battle of Poitiers was not just a military victory, but a turning point in history. It demonstrated that the era of heavy, unwieldy knightly armies was coming to an end, giving way to tactics, discipline, and the proper use of terrain. It was a battle that the English should not have won. They were saved by their desperate courage, the tactical flexibility of the Black Prince and John Chandos, and, not least, the arrogance and fatal mistakes of the French command. The capture of the king in battle was an event that shook the foundations of the medieval world. The victory at Poitiers was resounding, but it did not end the war. It only prolonged it. What other great battles of the past would you like us to cover? Suggest topics for future videos in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new chapters of history.